Hello everyone. So today what I'm going to do is just make a quick video explaining to you your first major assignment. And in the email that I send out with this information, I will include the due dates for this particular semester. Something that I would go ahead and note down is that this is going to be 40% of your grade, or sorry, excuse me, 30%. 30% of your grade. So you want to get started on it as early as you possibly can once the semester starts. Feel free to watch this video back multiple times and kind of take notes, but where you find the assignment prompt, which is what I'm going to use to just kind of go over the essays conventions, is on Blackboard on the left-hand side under assignments, and then you just click on essay number 1. And there's the very first link that says essay number 1, guidelines for printing, okay? The essay is a point-by-point comparative rhetorical analysis. The goal of this writing project is to allow you to consider further the shifts in the conventional expectations for writing across different disciplinary areas. So, what this means essentially is that you are going to be thinking about the way that two different areas of study, so say biology and sociology, approach writing about the same topic. And you can pick any topic you want, okay? Typically, kind of the more cliche topics like legalization of marijuana, abortion, gay rights, those can be banned from assignments or are banned just because they're not seen as creative enough. But for this assignment, you actually don't need to worry about that. If you want to do a more stereotypical topic, you can. Essentially, what you want to go ahead and write down is you need to find two different articles, like I said before, from different areas of study from the library databases. I'm going to go over how to do that as well. And what you will do is make sure they're on the same topic, and the way that you tell that an article is from a specific area of study is typically by the journal name. But if you're in doubt, you can of course ask me, you can ask a librarian. I'm going to link their contact info for you as well. So typically the journal names are pretty telling. So it'll say something like Journal of Psychology, right? No, that's from the field of psychology. I do want you to find articles that are published within the last 5 years if possible, and I'll talk a little bit about how to make sure that happens. It's easy to search, luckily, on the library databases. And something we'll do quite a bit this semester, so I think the more you kind of practiced it early on, just kind of click around on the databases, the better off you'll be. Because like I said in my first video, the research process is time consuming, okay? So it's not really something that can be done all the time in one sitting. Sometimes it takes multiple attempts. It takes kind of finding a few articles, saving them to your computer or emailing them to yourself, which if you're interested in one, always do that so that you do not lose it. And then maybe coming back to the computer later and seeing, can I find anything else I'd rather engage with? And for this assignment, what you want to think about is you're actually going to be doing a point-by-point comparative rhetorical analysis. So essentially what you're going to do is you are going to mention, if you want to write this down, both articles in each paragraph. And you're going to think about how, first of all, their structure compares and contrasts to one another. That's section 1, as you'll see in the subheading of the sample paper that I've attached to this email and on Blackboard. The second one is language, and the third is reference style. So you are going to be thinking about how those two articles have similar or differences in their structures, language, and reference style. And if you look at the prompt itself, it's kind of self-explanatory, I think, right? You're going to have an introduction that kind of begins with a hook, any pertinent background information. You kind of introduce the text you plan to work with, and then you move into a one-sentence thesis that kind of outlines, well, are the structure, language, and reference styles similar to one another or different? Okay, and that's, if you're more of a visual learner, hopefully this video helps you to some degree, but I would say look at the sample paper that I've attached to this email. Just because it's useful to kind of, I know, see what it is I'm looking for in the thesis statement. The thesis statement for this assignment is a clear roadmap for each paragraph that you're going to write, and it's actually unique in that we are going to be using subheadings for this assignment. And the reasoning for this is that most disciplines, actually pretty much all disciplines outside of English, use the convention of subheadings to add a sense of organization to their papers or their research, which you're going to find when you research articles. Okay, so we're going to kind of honor that convention that is used across different disciplinary areas and get familiar with using those subheadings ourselves, because you will be analyzing subheadings, for instance, possibly in the structure section. So what I've noted on the prompt is section number 2 is structure. Okay, we talked about this already, but I've given you a series of questions to consider about your 2 different articles, and you kind of want to think about with structure, well, how do these 2 articles work aesthetically, right? What I've noted is text structure refers to the way information within a written text is literally organized. So questions you should ask yourself when considering the structure of the text include, but are not limited to, actually, does the article present a main idea and details? Do you see different points of view on the topic? Is there a thesis statement, a hypothesis, which is what you typically see in more science disciplinary areas? Does it focus on a theory, experiments? Does it use quantitative data, which is, of course, numbers, statistics, qualitative data, which is a little bit more like logical reasoning or people's personal experiences to prove a point? Something else you can look at are there visual images in the 2 articles that you choose to work with? What type of title does each one have? So a title like cigarettes or smoking cigarettes, right, is very different than a title like smoking cigarettes on college campuses should be outlawed. Each one has a very different goal, right? One is very vague. You don't know what the article is going to be about. So right off the bat, it's not like the naysayer would be alienated from that idea or that article, that particular work. Whereas the other one is quite strong, right? There's an argument within the title itself, and that's something you can kind of pick apart and analyze. And that's what I would note about the structure section is you do not have to answer all of these questions. You might just answer like 1 or 2 of them. But it is important to find 2 articles that you can really easily and likely, right, contrast from one another. So maybe one's got charts and data and numbers, and the other one is filled with photographs instead, right? So you can really easily construct a paragraph thinking about and depicting to the audience how and in what way those visuals come to life in each article. And that's something else that you want to note is that you are writing to an audience, well, obviously me, right? But when you write the paper, you want to think about the audience as a group of individuals who have never ever seen your 2 articles before, right? So that that means that you have to use textual support to show how and in what way the structure comes to life. You can't just tell the audience. So you can't just write, there's data in the article from the field of sociology. There's visual imagery in the article from the field of psychology. No, right? What you would do is you would mention that data, and then you would use a transition, like for example, and then move into the textual support you have to show the audience how that is the case. And again, you don't have to answer all of those questions, but I would like you to end each body paragraph by kind of synthesizing, which is really just a fancy way of saying comparing and contrasting each article, how each one can be compared to the other, what grander conclusions can we draw about how those particular fields of study construct their research. So maybe one of them, say you had the topic of drunk driving in the US, right? Maybe one of them does use a lot of facts, data, statistics. And so that field of study chooses to make a point about what an issue this topic is in our country by providing numerical evidence. Whereas another area of study is using, say it's psychology, right? Images of how horrific and visceral these car accidents can be. And in that case, that area of study is actually relying more on imagery to show it's an issue in a way that kind of brings out an emotion in the reader, right? There might not be a lot of numbers, but there's a photograph that speaks volumes. So you'd want to kind of come to a conclusion about, well, what does that say about each area of study at the very end of the paragraph? The third section is titled Language, and language is pretty self-explanatory, but what you're going to be doing is thinking about how you can contrast the language in both texts, and that's a storm, so don't think I'm crazy. Okay, so how the language can be compared in both texts. What I have noted on the prompt is what is the author's tone, which is just a fancy way of stating what's the author's attitude about the subject, what's the author's attitude toward his or her audience, so on and so forth. Also, I would like you to think about how is the language coming to life in the article. So is it concise, right, and to the point, which would mean that the audience is actually meant to be, or the piece itself is meant to reach people outside of that discipline because the language is so accessible. Whereas if you've got an article that's got really jargony language or verbose language or language that's really idiosyncratic to the field at hand, like neurology, psychology, maybe they use language that only a neurologist would know or only a psychologist would know, you can kind of come to the conclusion pretty easily that that particular article is geared toward others within that field, unless, right, those terms are defined in text or via footnotes. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind, because the very last thing I say is who is the audience based on the language and how do you know? Again, this needs to be a paragraph where you give equal weight to each article, and that's something you want to do in each paragraph. If you want to just kind of write that down as a rule of thumb, you need to give equal weight to each article in each paragraph. So you don't want one article to dominate the other. You want to give equal weight to each one. And the reference style section, which is the last body paragraph, so body paragraph 4, or section 4 rather, this is when you compare the reference styles used in each article and you think about, well, why is this reference style being used? You will run across a lot of APA style typically when you are looking at academic journal articles, like I said in my very first video. And APA is unique and that it cites the year in text, for instance. You're going to notice little quirks about APA that you might not have seen before and that you haven't used if you've not worked with APA, because it is very different than other citation styles. So the thinking behind that, for instance, is fields that choose to write in APA, they're concerned with showing the audience up front, right? Here's how recent this research is. Whereas fields that write in maybe MLA, as you know from writing in MLA, we don't put the date in text. We wait until the works cited page. So the relevance or recency rather, or how recent a source is, really is not that important to scholars who are constructing their arguments in the form of MLA. I've also listed Chicago format, which is typically the format that historians use. You might see it in a few other disciplines, but typically that'll just be history. And if you want to read more about the different citation styles, this book is really awesome to, again, familiarize you with the conventions of APA. You will be reading a chapter in this book for homework on the conventions of APA format. You will also be taking a quick quiz on Blackboard, which just goes over again, the standard APA rules. So you're thinking about, well, how does the works cited page look in APA? How does the in-text citations, how do those look? APA typically honors the convention that we're going to use for this paper, which is subheadings, and those just kind of, again, serve as a transitional, right, purpose. They're kind of a way to transition between ideas and organize them. With our paper, you want to make sure that even though you are using subheadings, you still use transitions, okay? If you've not Googled it before, you can type in UNC Chapel Hill Transitions website on Google, scroll all the way down to the bottom. There's an awesome chart that kind of goes over really good comparison contrast phrases for each instance that you might find yourself in. So they're pretty easy to use, but it also goes over different transitional phrases that serve other purposes, right? So when you're showing an example or introducing a new idea or moving on to a new point, okay? The last section of the paper is going to just be the conclusion, plain and simple, right? This is where you're kind of summarizing the main points of the essay, but you also want to make sure to answer the question, why does it matter that various disciplines approach the same topic, right? What does it say about this topic that various